This morning we're going to talk about King David for just a little while. King David was the son of Jesse. He was a shepherd. He was chosen by God to replace Saul as the king of Israel. If you'll remember, Israel was in Egyptian bondage for about 430 years. God delivered them in Exodus, and then you read about their wilderness wandering. They spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness because they didn't believe God. Then they crossed the Jordan and under Joshua conquered the land of Canaan, the promised land. And then they spent about 450 years under judges, such as Moses and Joshua and finally Samuel. And then in 1 Samuel chapter 8, 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter, we find Israel asking for a king. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 1, Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of the firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice. And all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. So they asked for a king, and God was displeased with that and said that they were rejecting him as their king in their choice of a man to be king over them. And Saul was chosen to be the king. Saul fit the part. He was taller than everyone else. He was a handsome man. He fit the mold of what men would look at and say, that guy looks like a king. But Saul was disobedient, and he was removed in 1 Samuel chapter 13. He unlawfully offered sacrifices. He was not from the tribe of Levi, had no right to be offering these sacrifices under the law of Moses, and yet he did it. And then in 1 Samuel chapter 15, we find him disobeying God's command to utterly destroy the Amalekites. And as a result of that, he was removed from being king over Israel, and David was the one who was chosen to replace him in 1 Samuel chapter 16. 1 Samuel, the 16th chapter, and verse 7, Jesse, to be the king was to be from his family. Jesse was of the tribe of Judah. And so they began to parade his sons before Samuel for him to pick the king under the Lord's direction there. Verse 7, 1 Samuel 16, But the Lord said to Samuel, Do not look at his appearance, because Eliab had gone before them, one of the sons of Jesse, and he looked the part. And it says in verse 6 there, the Lord's anointed is before him, but the Lord said to Samuel, verse 7, Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And then verse 11, we see that David, his youngest son, is chosen. Verse 11, Samuel said to Jesse, Are all the young men here? Then he said, There remains yet the youngest. And there he is, keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, Send and bring him, for we will not sit down till he comes here. So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is the one. And Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose and went to Ramah. So we find David being chosen to replace Saul as the king of Israel. This is the period of time when the kingdom was still united. This is about roughly 1000 BC when David reigned as king over Israel for 40 years. 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 11 tells us. God made a covenant with David. This was during the Mosaic age, but he made a patriarchal covenant with David. We see that these still existed even during the time of the law of Moses. In 2 Samuel chapter 7. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, we can read about God's covenant with David. 2 Samuel chapter 7, beginning in verse 12. When your days are fulfilled and you rest with your fathers, I will set up your seed after you, who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the blows of the sons of men. But my mercy shall not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever." According to all these words and according to all this vision, so Nathan spoke to David. So God made this covenant with David that his descendants would rule on the throne of Israel. Psalm 132, verse 11. "The Lord has sworn in truth to David. He will not turn from it. I will set upon your throne the fruit of your body." And we find this fulfilled in Jesus. Its ultimate fulfillment was in Jesus in Acts chapter 2 when Peter preached that first gospel sermon. Acts chapter 2 beginning in verse 30. "Therefore, being a prophet, and knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him that of the fruit of his body according to the flesh he would raise up the Christ to sit on his throne, he, foreseeing this, spoke concerning the resurrection of the Christ, that his soul was not left in Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. This Jesus God has raised up, of which we are all witnesses. Therefore, being exalted to the right hand of God, and having received from the Father the promise of the Holy Spirit, he poured out this which you now see and hear. For David did not ascend into the heavens, but he says himself, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. Therefore let all the house of Israel know assuredly that God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ." Now David was revered by the Jews. So much to the point that when Jesus was accused because his disciples plucked heads of grain to eat on the Sabbath day, and the Pharisees said that they were violating the Sabbath, Jesus used the example of David eating the showbread from the tabernacle to show that they were being hypocrites, because David clearly violated the law, but they were accusing the guiltless. Jesus and his disciples were guiltless. Jesus uses David as that example to show their hypocrisy, because they didn't say anything about that. They had no problem with that because they revered David. And Paul, when he recounts the history of Israel and Antioch of Pisidia on his first missionary journey there in Acts the 13th chapter, says this about David. When he had removed him, speaking of God removing Saul, he raised up for them David as king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will. God there says that David was a man after his own heart. And that's the phrase that we want to look at this morning. In what way was David a man after God's own heart? We'll look at that for just a few moments. We'll notice first of all that David had complete faith in God. He totally trusted in God in 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17, beginning in verse 32, everybody knows the story of David and Goliath and what took place there. You have this giant, this Philistine giant, who is taunting the armies of Israel. You've got them on either side of this valley, and Goliath was going out day by day and taunting Israel and saying, send out a man to fight. And if I win, then you'll serve us. If he wins, then we'll serve you. And mocking the armies of the living God. And David, in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 32, David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing that he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. And then in verse 45, David confronting Goliath here. David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you, And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines, the birds of the air, and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give you into our hands. And then as you continue reading there, and as we probably all remember, sling and some smooth stones, and he slung one and hit Goliath right square in the forehead, and it sunk in, and David did take his life. He had been a shepherd, and he had been at the bear and the lion. He'd been able to kill, and he knew that it was by God's providence, God's help, that he was able to take care of these threats to the flock. And when he came against Goliath, he didn't trust